What's up, everybody? It's Trey here at Reactions to the Classics, and today got a really fun one. I'm going to be looking at the Smiths' debut self-titled record. I had never heard this record, never heard any Smiths songs. My biggest brush with them is one of my favorite bands of all time, 2000s emo and post-hardcore outfit Brand New. Takes a lot of influence from the Smiths. Before we get into the track-by-track review, I just want to say thank you for stopping by. If this is your first time ever at the channel, we appreciate it here. And here at Reactions to the Classics, we take a look back at some of the most classic albums of all time, do detailed track-by-track reviews of them. We also have lists, live streams, a bunch of other fun stuff. So if that sounds like something interesting to you, be sure to hit that big red subscribe button, and you can also link up with us on Facebook or Patreon if you'd like to support. But let's just get into this thing, and before we go into the track-by-track review, I always like to look at the history of these groups that I've never really heard before. So Johnny Marr and Morrissey met actually all the way back when they were teenagers, 1978. Marr is a few years younger than Morrissey, though he was around 14 at the time. Morrissey was around 18. And after that, they didn't meet again until 1982 because Johnny Marr was a big fan of the New York Dolls. And who authored a book about the New York Dolls? None other than Morrissey himself. He went up, knocked at Morrissey's door. Marr wanted to start a band. He asked Morrissey if he was interested. Morrissey then later agreed, and before you knew it, they started recording some demos on a 3-track cassette tape. You might be wondering, the Smiths, that's kind of a weird name. How did they choose that? Well, Morrissey said he chose the Smiths because it is one of the most ordinary names that there is and that he could think of, and he wanted to give a voice to the ordinary man or woman, and I think that's probably one of the endearing parts of the Smiths all this time later is because they really talked about real life situations and were able to connect with people, especially in this time period in the 80s where most of the popular groups in the rock genre and just over the top hair metal, stuff like that. They recorded their first demos in August of '82, and then this is when the other two members of the Smiths joined in. Shortly thereafter, you had drummer Mike Joyce, along with Johnny Marr's old friend Andy Rourke. They recorded some more demos, got turned down by EMI, reached out to Rough Trade Records, and then released their first single, Hand in Glove. They officially signed with Rough Trade in '83 and started working on their first album that was tentatively called The Hand That Rocks the Cradle. Now, they recorded this first album that would eventually become the Smiths' debut album with Troy Tate. Higher-ups at Rough Trade weren't a fan of the production, and they decided to scrap the entire project. They brought along John Porter, and in the middle of their late '83 tour, the Smiths re-recorded the entire record. We had some more chart success with This Charming Man and What Difference Does It Make, which eventually led to the February '84 release of this record. It peaked at number 2 in the UK due to the single success that they'd already had. They were already gaining some buzz. This is ranked 474 in the Rolling Stones top 500 albums of all time. Smiths, the only group to have all of their studio albums be on that Rolling Stones list. All that to say, we're just going to jump now into this record. First track, Reel Around the Fountain, which Morrissey was quoted as saying that the song is about loss of innocence, that until one has a physical commitment with another person, there's something childlike about the soul. Immediately here, I was struck by Johnny Marr's guitar. That's going to be a recurring theme throughout this record. The Smiths just have such a unique sound that I really hadn't heard from any other band before them or even up to this day. Of course, you hear tropes of them in indie and alternative music, but this exact sound is something that's unique to the group, and I really enjoyed this track. Essentially, this is about a lover who's not as dead or detached as people might want to believe. The song details some intimate encounters, but we learn through the lyrics that these are probably just in this guy's imagination. Really great track to start off and introduce the listener to the Smiths, at least in a proper album format. And then that takes us to song number 2. You've Got Everything Now. This is a more energetic track. The jangly guitar is going at a little faster pace, as well as that drum groove in there really makes you want to, get up, bob your head a little bit. And here Morrissey takes a critique at this guy that he knew as a kid is now, has his life on track whereas the narrator is kind of down on his luck. But the narrator mentions, I've never had a job. You know why? Because I never wanted one. And he notes that, okay, I've seen you smile, but I've never really heard you laugh. Who is rich or who is poor? Really just dealing with the theme that can money really buy happiness? Morrissey here, through this character in the song, notes probably not, and that he'd rather just be who he is and authentic than go out and try to pretend that he's happy when he's really not. This was one of my favorites on the entire record from first listen, and it kept that way as I continued to listen to the tracks. Moving on to track 3. Miserable Lie. Morrissey noted that he's really ready to be burned at the stake in total defense of that record. It means so much to me that I could never explain however long you gave me. It becomes almost difficult, and one is just simply swamped in emotion. Obviously, Morrissey really loves this track. I do too. Not as much as the first two songs we just talked about, but I see why Morrissey holds this in such high regard, especially with the falsettos that he hits at the end. It's pretty striking because we hadn't heard anything like that hidden in those high notes up to this point in the record. The tempo shifts in here deal, I think, well with the subject matter in the song. This guy is talking about lust and going after a prostitute, and just how that is really just a miserable lie. Moving on to track number 4, Pretty Girls Make Graves. This is taken from a phrase in a 1958 novel, and the premise essentially is that pretty girls, they attract a guy, eventually you hook up, you make a child who eventually will one day grow up and dies. Another unique premise here where the girl actually wants the guy for sex. Usually in songs it's flipped from the other way around. Morrissey notes that the guy's not the man you think I am. He's not going to be like everybody else and just go into this relationship just for the physical lust of it. I again thought Marr's tones here and guitar were a highlight, and this again was one of my favorite songs on the entire record. This A-side is just fantastic through and through, as this record is. Really enjoyed this one. The Hand That Rocks the Cradle is the next track here. This was actually the first song that Morrissey and Marr ever worked on together, and here we are told from the perspective of a father talking about how he'd do anything to protect his child. A little unique because he notes that he left his child. It's the first time he had seen him in a long time in his eyes, but it's not due to lack of love, so who knows what happened in there. A little intrigue. Melody reminded me, as a big Beatles fan, of Words of Love, especially the opening 20 seconds or so. If you're a Beatles fan, listen out for that. Another banging track, and then that leads us into the most famous song from this record, This Charming Man. This was not on the original UK release, but it was on all the US releases and subsequent re-releases, so I decided to include this in the review. And man, just from the opening jump, it's got a really jangly sound from Marr. It's a fantastic riff, and this brings forth the theme that is prevalent in a lot of the upcoming tracks in the rest of this record, and apparently a lot of the Smiths' work, of some sexual ambiguity, some homosexuality maybe, multiple different interpretations you can read into this. But here essentially some guy, his bicycle is broken at the top of the hill, and then this charming man comes up in his nice leather seats. He's got a great car. The main character in the song, we presume, is poor. He mentions he hasn't got a stitch to wear. He goes in, and then the guy that's rich could be seen as hitting on him, because after it's told, oh man, this man doesn't have a stitch to wear, he says, man, it's so gruesome that someone so handsome should care. And so again, we get a little bit of probably some sexual tension in here between these two guys. I just love this track. It would be my favorite on the entire record, and it is one of the most famous Smith songs going into my research, most well acclaimed, and I think that's for good reason. What a great, great tune. And then we're going to go on to track number 7, Still Ill, which contains some of my favorite lyrics. Does the body rule the mind, or does the mind rule the body? I don't know, for there are brighter sides to life, and I should know because I've seen them, but not very often. Morrissey's really bearing his heart on his sleeve here. Whether this was autobiographical or not, it's something that a lot of people can relate to, being dissatisfied with some life decisions and just choices that you've made and are currently in, and the circumstances that you're facing at the time. You've seen those bright sides of life, but it seems like the light just barely creeps in and doesn't stay for too long. Next up, we got Hand in Glove. As I mentioned before, it's the first single. Morrissey said that after Marr gave him a demo cassette of this song, he went home, wrote the lyrics for it in about 2 hours, knowing it'd be their first recorded work. Here we have a unique love, possible homosexual overtones yet again that some people have read in, and that I think could be read into the lyrics here. You have a harmonica that is towards the beginning and end, and that adds a little unique flair to it because no other songs on this record, I believe, have the harmonica. So I dug this one. Then to the next song, What Difference Does It Make? This actually started their big chart success. They got up to number 12 on the UK singles chart with this. Morrissey actually not a big fan of this, said it's one of his least favorite Smith songs, but again, we have the homosexuality theme here. It alludes to it, and you can see that in the lyrics. I mean, the title itself, What Difference Does It Make? He's getting, judged by other people he maybe thought were once his friends. And the musical theme reflects that because it's more morose, more brooding, different in that sense than a lot of the rest of the album. But I still enjoyed it. I mean, I'm a broken record here. I'm not one of those guys that says, oh, I just love every single track from every album I listen to. I know it might seem like that from this review, but that's because this album is pretty darn good. Then we're going to move on to I Don't Owe You Anything. Morrissey said it's the only Smith song he's officially disavowed. And here the title character makes a move, but the love interest doesn't want to go out tonight. So again, solid tune. I wouldn't put it up near the top or anything, kind of in the middle just due to this album, but this song is in the middle. You know, it's a darn good record. And then we're going to move on to the final track, one that's the heaviest I think on this record, just lyrically, Suffer Little Children. Garnered some controversy upon release because it details the Moors murders that occurred between 63 and 65 in the Manchester area where children were murdered. Morrissey was really touched by this story. He wrote a song about it. It garnered controversy. Some stores even pulled the singles and this entire record off due to the controversy. Some lines that hit you right in the heart here. He mentions some of the victims by name. He says, Edward, see those alluring lights? Tonight will be your very last night. A woman said, I know my son is dead. I'll never rest my hands on his sacred head. He talks from the children's point of view, which is haunting yet just very powerful because they're talking to the perpetrator of this crime, saying that you may sleep but you will never dream, because they're going to be there always haunting this person for what they did to them. What a way to end this record on a really morose, brooding, powerful note, and one that made me really think about the subject and introduced me to this subject matter. Being here in the States, I'd never heard of this before, and I'm glad that Morrissey was able to shine a light on it. And that's going to move to my favorite tracks. Man, there's so many to choose from here. I already mentioned this Charming Man, Pretty Girls Make Graves, Suffer Little Children, The Hand That Rocks the Cradle. We're going to move to my overall score. What a debut record. I'm going to be at an 8.5 on this. I was highly impressed. Really has a sound that I'm attracted to. I'm looking forward to going through the rest of their discography because this record was absolutely great, man. You never heard it, I would suggest listening to it. It's 11 songs if you include this Charming Man. I don't think you'll be disappointed, and I'm really just looking forward to going through the rest of their catalog. If you'd like me to do that and keep the Smiths reviews coming, let me know. They only have 4 studio albums, so we'll be able to knock them out pretty quick. Let's try to get 40 likes on this thing. That'll let me know y'all enjoyed it or interested in more. It kind of helps in the direction of the channel. Please let me know what you think of the Smiths debut record below, your favorite tracks, how it stacks up to the rest of their catalog. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the big red subscribe button. I really appreciate y'all joining me today. It was a great foray into the Smiths. And until next time, my friends, happy listening, and I will see ya.